All right. So I really hope that you are taking this opportunity to really get into the readings. And they're really important because this is history that you are not taught. Or maybe you are taught. I don't know. Since I was in high school, this stuff was not covered. And I wish it had been. I wish that I had been given a better understanding of what America was founded on, so that maybe I wouldn't have made some, ignorant statements or ignorant moves or whatever the case may be. First and foremost, please take a look at taking the land. That's really important. Some of you might not find it very interesting. There's a big quiz on it right after this. And also take a look at understanding like decolonization. A lot of these are like super cool little like Instagram videos that are, going to be potent. And that's my ultimate goal. Understanding when we're talking about taking the land, it's not just the taking of the land, it's how we took it and what we're doing with it. We'll talk about what we do with it later. And the answer is we're destroying it. But anyway, we'll get there later as we go forward. Many things, a few things that we're going to be talking about. You're going to be doing in your discussion, you're going to be talking about manifest destiny in that picture. Right, when you take a look at that picture and look at what stands out to you. And a few things I'm just going to kind of cover some of the vocabulary that I want you to kind of recognize and understand. I'm sure you've heard it many times before, but manifest destiny, 19th century doctrine in which the belief that the expansion of the U.S. throughout the American continents was both justified and inevitable. Okay? All right, in the name of God, oftentimes is what it is used as. Okay? All right, so the Dawes Act of 1887, please understand, when we talk about laws, what is lawful is not always moral. I'll get to that in a second. Okay, so the Dawes Act was authorizing the federal government to break up tribal lands by partitioning them into individual plots. Okay, we'll talk about the land in just a second. Only those Native Americans who accepted the individual allotments were allowed to become U.S. citizens. So if you don't follow through to the Dawes Act, your land's going to get taken away from you. However, they deem it necessary. Okay. All right, indigenous peoples known as obviously First Peoples, First Nations, Aboriginal peoples, Native peoples, and so forth. Okay, and they are the original or earliest known inhabitants of the area. Okay, so indigenous peoples on the land, those are the people who are first there that we know of, in contrast to groups that have settled, occupied, or colonized it more recently. Okay. And that's not to say that's just in America. That's all over the world, right? There's always been first peoples, and then there's been those who have colonized it, right? So it's not necessarily just a race thing. It's not like all white people. It's all countries. This just happens all over the world, okay? So just keep that in mind when we talk about indigenous peoples. It is the first peoples. Inalienable rights are those rights that could not be surrendered, by citizens of a sovereign or supreme ruler. Such rights were thought to be natural, independent of positive law, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The fundamental rights are endowed on every human being as by his or her creator, all right, and are often referred to as natural rights. Ask yourself, what is a natural right? Homes, housing, and food. Seems like a very natural right, right? Oddly enough, we pay for that. But anyway. All right, institutional racism. That is the big thing that we're going to be talking about most, at least within this particular section. We might do it later. Institutional racism is a form of racism that is embedded in a normal practice within a society or an organization. Schools, definitely one of them. Policing is one of them. There's all kinds of stuff. Anyway, it can lead to such issues as discrimination in criminal justice, obviously, employment, obviously, housing, trying to get a house, right? If you're a person of color and you're trying to get a house, you might notice, the white couple next door seems to be getting the better deal. Yeah, we all know that. So anyway, what are we going to do different? That is a very good question. All right, so healthcare, obviously, political power, education, you name it, we see it. We see this. The question is, what are we going to do different? Let's find out. All right, you're going to notice that I have a few things in here like the Ice Cream Man's music, nursery rhymes, a lot of things that are very racist. And again, I give you the warning, but if you are like me, I grew up in a very small town up in Paradise, right? We didn't have a lot of, I grew up in a Hispanic family, but there was a lot of things that I did not know were racist because I wasn't told, or it wasn't something that I experienced. Okay, when we talk about literacy, what is something we might have experienced? I am very illiterate when it comes to certain things, and unfortunately, that is one of them. Okay, so when we would hear the Ice Cream Man, well, we didn't know that these songs were incredibly racist, right? Because they changed the wording on it. So when we were singing it in like elementary school, we didn't understand the root of it. These are things that are very important to recognize and hopefully abolish and get rid of, right? And some people might be like, oh, well, that's my childhood. I'm like, yeah, well, maybe it's time that we just let that go and recognize that it is inappropriate. Yeah, that's all I'm saying. All right. All right. When we talk about interpersonal racism, man, I am slurring words today. Racial domination that manifests in everyday interactions and practices. It can be overt. It can be very obvious. Right now, we're seeing a lot of very overt and obvious, racism. But at the same time, we also see very overt, or usually quite covert is the word I was looking for. Okay, it's found in habitual, commonsensical, and ordinary practices of our lives. Right, that could be the way a classroom is set up, the way people grade, the way people blah blah blah. It could go on forever, right? It's just what is embedded in us based on what we've experienced through society. Okay, settler colonization. Sorry, I'm tripping on words today. Okay, this one, I grew up in Paradise, right? Born and raised, my family was up there. My family was up there when the fires hit, right? Everything burned down to the ground, blah, blah. We've all, well, not we all, but majority of us have probably experienced that at some point. One thing that was really hard for me after that was the idea of people running up there and, taking the land, taking our land. We don't have a house anymore, but, the land. And my fear was, people buying it up and turning it into something that wasn't originally what I grew up in. I identify with Paradise. It is like my heart, my soul. It's just who I was. It's burned, it's gone. Now what do I do, right? So when I think of the Maui fires, it really does resonate with me a lot because it makes me go, wow, can you fathom? And I remember right after these fires, tourists are walking along on the ashes, taking pictures. Oh, take a picture of me over here on this burnt house. Potentially standing on bodies, by the way. They had not gone through with the cadaver dog and gotten all the bodies yet. So that was gross enough in its own right. Like, just have some respect. And I imagine had people been doing that up in Paradise, which I really did get irked when I would hear people like, oh, I just drove through to take a look. I'm like, go fuck yourself, dude. Get out of my town. I can't fathom, what people on Maui were dealing with. So anyway, when we talk about settler colonialization, we're talking about a form of colonialism that seeks to replace the original population of the colonized territory with a new society of settlers. Sounds an awful lot like Hawaii, right? Or actually in America too, same way, right? Move people along, as it were, and make sure you get up that land so that you can use it. Okay, we're gonna get to the reading in just a second. Okay, Hawaii being occupied by non-native people, scarce resources of a land that is being exploited, right? So in taking the land, I'm going to scroll down a little bit to the reformers. The reformers' intent originally wasn't about the land. It's not about the land. We don't want the land. We're here to save you. We're here to save the first peoples, the indigenous peoples. We're going to make sure that you don't need so much land. Why? Because you are no longer going to be a hunter. You are going to be a farmer. And if you're a farmer, you don't need as much land as a hunter, right? And if that's the case, here, we're going to help you. You need less land, and then that way we'll do what we need to do with this land over here, but let's just help you out. That was their ultimate goal. Their ultimate goal. I'm sure there's a lot of gray area in there, but that was supposed to be what their thing. It was supposed to save the indigenous peoples. We're going to save you from yourselves, even though they had been living on that land for who knows the beginning of time, right? Yet these, colonizers come in and go, we can help you, we can save you. And it's like, why? I've been here forever. You don't need to save me. I'm fine. Thank you very much. The land is beautiful. It is doing wonderful as we take care of it. Colonizers come in, build over, blah, blah. We're where we're at right now because of it, but it is what it is. All right. And again, the Dawes Act, make sure you take a look at that one. The allotment of land, 160 acres to the head of each family, smaller to women and orphans. The rest were sold to whites, and the money was going to, quote unquote, education. When we take a look at Columbia with American Progress, that picture, what book is she holding? All right, we talk about education. Please again go take a look at some of the readings, because I'm sure you probably have heard about the Indigenous children that were in Canada at that Catholic church, and there were like hundreds of bodies that they found, right? And it bothers me. Anyway, so the goal was to take the children to save the children, right? It was to kill the Indian to save the man, or something like that. Forgive me, I have there's a word here. Let me go back up to it. Where was it? Kill the Indian to save the man. That was exactly it, right? And the idea here is they're saving the person by getting rid of their culture, getting rid of their identity. We're going to pull that out of you so that you can be better. And I'm sorry that I have to say it that way, because that's unfortunately the mindset of these people who were colonizing the area. Okay, so, and I apologize. I know it's kind of hard to hear, hard to think about, hard to realize that, yes, this is what our country was founded on, right? Institutional racism. We were trying to use education. We still use education as a fucking tool, right, to keep pushing for racism. Let me tell you why I am so bothered by it. So a couple years ago, my friend had gone to Georgia, and she was visiting family, and it was super hot summer day. And she goes to her mom. She's like, "Mom, let's go swimming. Let's go to the public pool." And her mom looks over and she's like, "We don't have public pools here." And her daughter, my friend, is like, "What do you mean you don't have pools here?" And the mom goes, "Yes, because right after desegregation, they filled in all the pools, all the public pools. The only way you were able to swim is if you had a pool of your own, if you had, I don't know, some club you were in, right? So as you can see, socioeconomically, you had to have money in some way to go swimming. Well, if you were somebody of color and wanted to go swimming in that area, you couldn't do it because all the pools were filled in." And so there's two things that bother me about that story. Is one, when she told me, I was shocked. That bothers me. That shows me the privilege that I had, where I was shocked to hear information that should have been common knowledge, but it wasn't, because two, our education system sucks. I'm sorry. I have to say it, at least especially when it comes to history. They just seem to glaze over the shit that we really need to know. And it's upsetting that somebody at my age, right? And, it bothers me that my privilege is that obvious, where I'm like, "Oh, I didn't know that." It's like, how did you not know that? It's something I should have known. One, I'm living up in paradise in a small little, podunk town. No offense to any of my fellow paradisians, right? We didn't have a lot of culture. I grew up in a Hispanic family, but it was whitewashed, and we recognize that, right? Like, I get it. It's just bothersome that we didn't know. And I didn't learn this until outside of school on some random, conversation with a friend. Anyway, it's very important that we recognize how education can be not good for us when it comes to, what's the word? I don't know. Anyway, the intent behind the education, I think, is the part that we need to be mindful of. Okay, so anywho, long story short, I'm going to pull back away from that one. So that, going back into the reading, must teach Indigenous people to farm so they don't need more land. That was the goal. If we teach them to farm, they won't need the land. And so then we'll take the land from you. We'll take it. We'll pay you some money for it. But let us have this land that you don't need anymore. Anyway, long story short, the reformers' idea was that natives don't need it. We can take it. This is for their own good, they said. The writing was on the wall, they said. All right, we're only doing what we could to keep them from becoming extinct. The irony of the only reason why any of the indigenous peoples would become extinct is if you take their land from them, right? The things that I haven't posted, which maybe I will, is, some of the ways in which they would do that. I don't know if you've seen the mounds of buffalo that some of the settlers had murdered and destroyed and burned so that so that indigenous people didn't have things to hunt, didn't have food. Yeah. So anyway, gets me a little upset, just because it's shocking. Like, not shocking. It is shocking because it's not stuff I knew when I was in elementary school. I guess at what point do you teach somebody that? But it shouldn't be when you're 40 years old. You know what I'm saying? So anyway. When we talk about taking the land, obviously there is a superiority complex of some races, right? When it comes to all this, the thing is, race is a social construct, right? When you really look at it and you look at the biology of it, it proves to us that unfortunately race is a construct. It is something that we use to feel better than, right? When we talk about the other, we use race as an excuse, even though technically, biologically, we're all the same. Even when we talked about the difference between men and women in the reading, Just Say No to Boys Will Be Boys, we recognize that there's a very little difference between men and women, right? So we're all human and we need to recognize that, okay? Anyway, so as a note, just because this is something we're continuing to observe as scientific truth, it doesn't stop humans from using race as a source of social, political, and monetary dominance. All right? It's not all white people. All right? So if you're over here and you're like, oh, it's not fair, I'm white, I don't mean to do that. It's like, that's not what we're saying. This goes on in all countries, in all over it's been going on for the beginning of time as human beings trying to dominate over the other. Anyway, there's other science behind that, but I don't need to go into all that. So we misrecognize race as natural when we begin to think that racial cleavages, right, those differences and inequalities can be explained by pointing to attributes, right, inherent to the race, in the race itself, as if it were biological. Race is not biological. Sorry, let me rephrase that. Instead of understanding how social power, so race is not biological, if that makes sense to any of you all, right? It's not biological. It is based on just how we look. Anyway, whatever. There's readings. Do the readings. I'm not an expert in that part, okay? Instead of understanding how social powers, economic forces, political institutions, and cultural practices have brought about these divisions, okay? That's what's causing the division, okay? If you want, there's supplemental on what is racial domination, blah, blah. I give you these for you so that you can go through and find out more. Correct me on things, all that good stuff, okay? That is pretty much it for the readings. I do want you to take a look also at segregation by design. I will go into redlining in a little bit, but when we talk about taking the land, many times it's done lawfully, which does not necessarily mean morally. All right. And then there's other times where it is not morally. What's the word? It's not moral the way that this has happened. We talk about the decade of fire, and then this is where, places have been burned accidentally in order to take the land. Take a look at segregation by design. It's an Instagram post and there's images, but it actually shows you how many times certain communities within a city have been gotten away, right? And they'll put something there like a parking garage versus housing or whatever. Okay, so there's more to it. You can actually use one of those as your topics for your research topic if you'd like, if you really want to get into that, right? Anywho, so go ahead and take a look at those. I'm going to give you a second to take the quiz. And then after that, we're going to go into, let me see where it is. Where is it? Where is it? Oh, the Tulsa Massacre. Okay, and we're going to talk about that in a second too. So anyway, go ahead and watch the rest of this. It's more than, it's not just going to be me talking, blah, 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 blah. But anyway, if you have questions, please go ahead, let me know. All right, enjoy.